Hello and welcome to the Arts Are Education Talk It Up podcast, where we talk to national, state, and local leaders who are working to make arts education part of every student's life. I'm Jim Palmarini, your host. Arts Are Education is sponsored by the National Coalition for Core Arts Standards. NCAS is a collaboration of 8 national arts and arts organizations who are actively working to ensure quality standards-based arts education opportunities for every student. So this podcast today was inspired by the recent Arts Education Partnerships Arts Education Working Group Town Hall for Arts Administrators, in which district leaders from throughout the country came together in a first of its kind convening to talk about the issues they are facing every day. The event included student speakers, a trio of presenters presenting different constituencies, and a series of breakouts focusing on different critical issues cited by attendees based on a poll. Safe back to school plans, diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, SEL, virtual and hybrid learning, staffing and funding, and advocacy. So I'm joined today by arts education leaders who participated in this convening, each one working at a different, but no less meaningful level of decision making. Mario Rossero, Executive Director of the National Arts Education Association, Alysia Lee, Fine Arts Coordinator for the Maryland Department of Education and President-elect of the State Education Agency's Directors of Arts Education, otherwise known as CDA, and Nora Schull, District Arts Program Coordinator for Minneapolis Public Schools. So glad you're here. Welcome, Alysia, Mario, and Nora. So before we get started with the questions, I'm going to ask each of you to elaborate for a bit on who you are, your organization or agency, and a bit about the work that you do. So Mario, let's start with you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jim. Really appreciate the invite to be here. So I've got the great privilege and honor of being the executive director for the National Art Education Association. And we are just about 75 years old. In 2022, we will turn 75. And we are the member association that supports visual art, design, and media arts educators across the US and internationally. And that takes space in K-12 and higher ed and college, in our researchers and museum spaces and community spaces. And what my team and I really strive to do is to meet members where they are and to really spend a lot of time listening to make sure that we're providing professional development supports on educational issues and trends. We're providing advocacy and policy supports. Sometimes that looks like training. Sometimes that looks like letters of support. Sometimes that looks like really bringing convenings and groups of people together to really be in that workshop kind of space. But we really want to make sure that we are helping to make sure that, like you said, arts education is available for all of our learners and communities everywhere. So thanks.
Thanks, Mario. And Alysia, you're up.
Thank you so much for having me here, Jim. And
you bet.
I represent the Maryland State Department of Education's Fine Arts Office, where we have a wonderful vision for lifelong learning in and through the arts for all Maryland citizens. I enact that by doing some policy writing, of course, doing some technical assistance, but also really revitalizing the way that we serve local school communities, educators, and supervisors by really shifting our focus to be very constituent focused and doing a lot of listening. And listening is going to be a word I share quite a few times, I'm sure, in this hour in terms of talking about state agencies and local school system supports. This past school year, we produced over 400 hours of virtual synchronous professional learning, all really responding to constituent demand and requests for support and technical assistance around the fine art standards, teaching online, creating virtual performances, racial justice in and through the arts, supporting LGBTQ+ students and families. So I really enjoy my role in really just being connected, being that connective tissue between state and local government.
Thanks, Alysia. Nora, from you.
Hi all, thank you for having me here. My name is Nora Schull and I coordinate the arts programming for Minneapolis Public Schools. We're a district of about 36,000 students. And so I'm lucky to support music, dance, theater, visual arts, and media arts for the district. So
I'm so glad to hear that shout out for media arts. Media arts will rule the world. So at that, let's get started with some questions. And we're going to start with some one-on-one questions. And I think the most appropriate one, Mario, as one of the organizers of the town hall, what was the impetus for creating this event?
Yeah, great question. So, as part of the arts education partnerships, there are different working groups, and this particular one was having some, we're constantly having policy conversations, but at one a few months ago, we were starting to identify some gaps, and we realized that, there's sort of a group of national arts ed leaders of organizations that are constantly in conversation about policy, both that's coming down and that we're responding to, but also maybe some policy changes and updates that we're interested in terms of arts education. And we opened up the conversation to say, there's some other key players in this work locally on the ground. And we're often in touch with state leaders and even some regional leaders, but we are not always as inclusive as we could be of those local district arts coordinators and supervisors. And we really identified them as a critical linchpin in this work because they're so often the translators of information, whichever direction it's going, like through them to teachers or from teachers to administration. And they're the ones that are really understanding, responding the needs of every art form in their school community. And so, especially as someone who, I've been a classroom arts teacher and I served as a district arts supervisor, and I understand that sort of like that critical nature of those roles and connecting all those pieces. And so we really wanted to create a space where we could invite and welcome in those folks to the conversation, not just for nationals to share out, but really a multi-directional kind of conversation where we were all contributing to what we're facing right now, both in terms of challenges and opportunities, and that we could gather together as thought partners to really change the conversation and really, link arms to make a difference.
I love three words that you said: multi-directional conversation, translators, and creating a space. I think that's so critical to the work that connects everybody together. So Alysia, you served as a keynote presenter as part of that multi-directional conversation. So in your capacity as a state arts agency fine arts coordinator, what were some of the things that you shared in your presentation?
Sure. Well, I also wanted to make sure I was representing C-Day, which is this national network, right, of folks, the job-alike conversation. So a both and piece, right? And what I brought was glad tidings from the C-Day network. We most of the C-Day folks started out as local school system supervisors, so they understand the demands of the job, but they also understand the untapped potential of that network of folks. And so, just to bring some space to say that we want to partner with those local a nationwide network of local school system supervisors. Sounds like a great resource to have, and we want to partner with them. And mostly, we want to show up as listeners. So, we really value their boots on the ground placement. Many of my colleagues, I know for me, during non-COVID times, I typically visit at least at minimum 100 schools a year. So many of my colleagues do the same, right? So that's wonderful, but we're not there every day. Our visits are not the same as being there in hand in hand with educators, helping them to problem solve. And I'm going to make that translation. So I think that it's important that that everyone knows how vital this community is. And so it's so great that we're building some connective tissue amongst them nationally. And it's going to be a strong force and a strong voice in arts education. And so this idea of listening, right? Of really making sure that we were thinking about the way that we try to think about the supervisors at our system is that we really try to set priorities based on their needs, not the other way around. So, I spend a lot of time just asking, what do you need? What are you seeing? What are the trends? Let me talk to your teachers. Let's convene. How can I help facilitate dialogue and conversation to identify those trends? Now, a lot of the trends wind up being the things that maybe I would have come up with, on my own, right? but really getting that buy-in and knowing that we're serving constituents based on their voice around anti-racism, around being able to align your instruction to the standards. Teachers really are looking for those levels of excellence in their work. How do I incorporate SEL? What kind of culturally competent lens do I need to be able to do that? So to be able to service folks, not just based off of our own ideas, but because we know that these are requests that are coming to the field, lets us know that then we're really impacting student achievement. And that's the goal. That's why we're all here. So I think those are the glad tidings that I attempted to bring, that we're here to listen and we're here to learn and build resources based off of the needs of that group.
I love that, the idea that you're listening and demonstrating respect and care for these educators who are so challenged as it is to do their jobs today. So I think that's wonderful, really. Now, Nora, as a district arts education supervisor, what motivated you to attend this coming together to represent your district arts education book in Minneapolis?
Yeah, I was motivated to attend because I find, that it can be an isolating role at times. And so the fact that you can make community and you can make connection with other folks that share a similar role as you is really important, because as Mario said, like, I feel a little bit like my role is also a translator. So I'm taking policy, I'm helping our leaders within the district figure out ways to utilize the different fundings, the different policies out there, and then also supporting and like, what does that trickle down to the classroom? And so because this role shifts and you're dealing with all kind of sectors, it's great to hear how other folks in this role are also doing it, because there's a lot of creativity out there. And when you work in silo and you work in isolation, you sometimes forget like all the cool things that you can do. And so I'm just really excited to be a part of something larger, also a collective.
So I'm going to go right to a secondary question with you, Nora. From the town hall, what were the key takeaways that really resonated with you?
Sure. First, let me say I'm excited to continue them because I think, like the first one with all things, it's just like an introduction. It's a snapshot of where it's going to go. And so I think the big thing, is just that realization that there are others out there that are dealing, with the same issues that you're dealing with, and that there's a lot of different ways that districts are dealing with it, handling it, being creative. And, we can get sort of maybe myopic, like this is only happening to us. And then it was a good realization, like, oh no, this is a larger feeling, a larger existence. And I'm really excited to see where they go and how the work continues.
So Mario, back to you. What were your key takeaways from the town hall?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I've been fortunate to be part of a couple debrief conversations, and one of the conversations focused on what surprised us. I think there were a couple of things. One of the things that surprised me in particular was, we did both a survey in advance of audience members, and then we did a poll in the moment, and we asked about, a range of topics: diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, social emotional learning, virtual, instruction, careful in-person instruction, and I think budgets and staffing was kind of the range. And I think we were all surprised to see that virtual learning supports came in at 1%, 1% of the poll respondents. And then that breakout room was the smallest. And
I know.
And, we had conversation about this where, this is what I love about arts educators, is that we are so often and so constantly faced with some kind of limitation or restriction and resource constraint that we're just natural born problem solvers, and we figure it out. I'm not saying it's easy or that we love it, but we're good at it. And so we figured out this virtual piece because we had to, right? That's what I heard from folks. And there is a big focus clearly on how do we, the changing landscape of in-person instruction. So like that was one piece that was kind of surprised to hear that we maybe have moved along to other things. Not that it's not over, but we've moved on. And I think what we saw was, diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility was definitely a top priority for everyone. And that looks different. That's both about where an adult is on that learning continuum, what they're bringing to their classroom, what they're bringing to their school communities. There's a lot of questions there, and people still need a lot of direction and resource. And I think my other takeaway is that there's a real appetite for this space, this unique space for this population of arts leaders to come together, because, like Nora said, it can feel very isolated. And we know that there are others out there, and there hasn't been one dedicated space for these folks together. There's lots of pockets of excellence of smaller groups coming together, but we're hoping we tapped into something where we can really bring, all of these leaders together, because the ability to share strategies to solve problems means that I might not have to figure that out from, steps A, B, and C. I might be able to jump on a little bit further along because Nora helped share what her strategy looks like. And that way I don't have to, go through that myself. So just a few of my takeaways.
Alysia, your takeaways from the town hall.
Sure. Well, in Maryland, when I started in my position in Maryland, I did not create the community that already exists amongst the supervisors, but I did name it. And that really helped to solidify it. They were thinking of themselves before as and we were thinking of them as a state agency. No, those are the local supervisors. But actually, I started calling them the network. And that really made a shift for all of us in understanding the capacity that group had to be a think tank, to help each other solve problems, to have some commiseration sessions, but also to elevate student achievement and instruction for the whole state. And so I saw that happening just in that space, just giving people the space and putting a label on it. Yeah, labeling it. It's like, is this what this is? Is this what we're calling this? Can really rev the whole thing up. So in Maryland, we've seen, the network has come together. Maryland produced the first set of guidelines specifically for fine arts instructors, and for instruction areas, we call them creative classroom spaces, but creative learning spaces for fine arts educators in the world. That document was downloaded all across the country and the world because it was the first one of its kind. That was because a group of supervisors in the middle of, I don't know, one of the worst things that's happened to us collectively, said, let's work together. I can't do this on my own. I cannot prepare a 70-page report on my own, but together we can. We can go far. If you want to go far, go alone. If you want to go long, we go together. So we really wanted to create something that was robust. The same thing around anti-racism. When cultural critical race theory started kind of clouding our airways, I just said, great, let's meet with the supervisors. What do you all say? And from that, we were able to get our directive orders to create the Anti-Racist Educators in the Arts Learning Lab, a professional learning community for arts educators. The only one, again, in the country at a State Department, where we're focusing specifically on training teachers to apply a culturally responsive and anti-racist lens in their work. So by shifting to the network, calling it something, and just naming the things, and we are connected, really inspires people to feel the connections that are already present, but that might need a little bit of support. So I saw that same potential at the town hall in terms of what could be, and we definitely need their voices at the national level. There is a missing space for them. There's a gap. There's a gap at the national level.
It is so amazing that you were able to identify a particular group as an entity. We are a specific group with specific needs. And you built that network, which allowed you then to create the anti-racism work that you did. Without that network, you would not have been able to do that. So congratulations on that work. I've looked at it a little bit. It's great work. Thank you so much for doing that. So some group questions. So from your perspective, what lessons have you learned and heard as a result of shifts in the education ecosystem prompted by the pandemic, especially as these changes impact the arts? Anybody want to step in? Raise a hand, go ahead. All right, Nora, you're up.
Sure. I think one of the biggest things that I took away from my role was the ability to make change. It's there. And a lot of times, especially when you look at the levels of leadership, there's reasons in their mind at that time that certain things can't happen. But this time really proved that we can shift when we want to shift. And so how are you going to continue to utilize that? And once you've made those shifts, how do you continue to keep them moving forward in a way that's helping students? And so that was one of that realization, because a lot of times, you think you're limited by your circumstances, at least in arts education. But we really saw a lot of commitment to, we provided students with at-home arts learning kits, and before that was never a thing where we provided students individual art supplies, but we shifted and we made that happen. And so it's kind of those small things now. And so as a district, we shouldn't go back to saying, well, your school doesn't have a budget for art supplies, or you need to get it from your PTA, or you need to go X, Y, and Z, because we did it. And so how do you keep those things going forward?
All right. Alysia or Mario?
I would say one of the biggest shifts I've seen is just us understanding how strong. Yes, I think Nora's point about just understanding what's possible, right, has been a big piece, but also understanding the centering of the creative process in a classroom, something that we've been talking about, especially since the new standards have come out, the new National Core Art Standards, is possible for all grade levels and all discipline areas and all styles of coursework. So frequently, prior to in-person learning shifting to virtual learning, we saw a lot of resistance frequently from ensemble-based classes in the music space, right? I don't have the time. We have to learn this repertoire. So suddenly, with with virtual learning, we had an opportunity to really hone in on some skill-based pieces. I think a lot of students really became, especially in the ensemble spaces, much more independent thinkers and learners, right? But also there was a lot of room to make sure that students could respond to the big ideas in the repertoire they were exploring by creating or composing new pieces, or at least improvising, right? So we saw that shift happening by necessity. And I'm very curious to see what that shift will look like when we come back, because we're not all the way back yet, but when we're back to a more natural rhythm of what we remember from before, how teachers will shift their pedagogy. Because I think teachers that were very reluctant to move in that direction because, maybe their skills weren't very crisp in that area, or they were feeling the pressures of ensemble-based ensemble making things, all states and trophies and all of that. So what those teachers, though, saw the higher levels of engagement they were able to create in a virtual space with a disconnect physically by involving the students' creativity and voice. So I'm excited to see how those teachers will have had that experience and go back to something else and say, I've got to make room for my students to have their voices and priorities and stories shared in the space. And to be honest, that's the SEL integration that everyone is also clamoring for at this moment. It's like, we've got to value SEL. That's the way that pedagogy and SEL connect, is when we, as our approach to teaching says, when do my students get a chance to create? Right. And so I'm excited to see what will come from that. And I'm really hoping to build up just more opportunities for teachers to tell their stories of what they created during that time, as a reminder of how critical the lessons from that time can be in helping us to elevate the work that we do going forward.
Mario.
So I absolutely second what both my colleagues just said. So Alysia and Nora, we're very much on the same page here with these lessons. And, I think there's two things for me. It's, kind of to Nora's point, wow, education can change swiftly when we need to. And I saw instructional practice, instructional moves shift so fast. And the way that my educators are now approaching lesson planning and delivery, it's like, I now have a bank of pre-recorded demos that allow me to be more present and more individualized in my instruction with my students, because I have that on tap. I mean, just that alone is a big shift, let alone all the other moves. So I think that's one piece. The other piece that I'm thinking that might just add to the conversation is this sort of what virtual has given us in terms of the ability to build community and reach folks that we wouldn't reach otherwise. So not just for the convening that we're talking about today, but boy, as a teacher, I was always trying to reach every parent at my school. And suddenly like it or not, through COVID and virtual learning, for those that were in that space, I'm in every home, right? And so one of the hardest challenges we have is getting the good story of arts education out there, and to really sort of demystify and unpack what arts learning actually looks like. And so I really hope that more parents had the opportunity to actually witness that and understand it to a better degree, so that we can see the next evolution of the arts education conversation in the public sphere.
There's so much going on today in schools and education in general: equity, cultural competence, remedial education, teacher burnout, learning loss, student retention, to name a few. So given all these intersecting concerns, do you think establishing a common language between arts education decision makers working at different levels, such as yourself, that is national, state, and local, would be helpful? Or in fact, is that already happening, I guess, is maybe the refined question. Anybody?
I think that will be helpful only if only if we take our cues from the practitioners. So it's too often we show up with our lingo and arts educators go, "What are you talking? I don't even understand what you're saying." The translation has to cease. So we really need to take our cues and our verbiage for what's working and what the priorities are from students and teachers. I think that would go a long way. I do find sometimes my ivory tower language, I have to translate it when I'm speaking. And then what I try to do is go, let's stop that code switching and let me carry this language up with me the next time I'm in an ivory tower meeting, to say, let's call it this instead, or let's make it more plain, or that's actually not the focus of this work, So I think that's one of those social justice mindsets that I'm seeing people adopt, right? Is how can we take that idea of in social justice of centering the people who are most impacted and move that to an institutional place in education and really center the voices of students and teachers. And so I'm starting to see more people kind of catch that wheel. I think this town hall is a piece of that as well, right? It's like centering, well, we talk about these people all the time, but they're not here when we talk about them. So that's weird. Let's not do that. So I think that's one of those ways that this time has kind of also impacted us in nationally to think differently about the way that we communicate with each other.
Alysia, I don't know how to do a virtual high five or what the appropriate thing is, but it's like, yes. So if I can just build off of that, the other piece is that with the language and vocabulary, I'm in this equity working group that I have learned so much by being a part of. We were really working to come up with the terminology and really define things. And in the middle of that process, what we realized was the most important lesson and process was to just go through the process of researching and unpacking the terminology, not to land at the right word or term, but to look at a range of them and understand them, and then have that conversation with colleagues. And it just opened up our understanding that depending on who you are and where you are, whether it's geography wise or in your learning journey, there are different terms that might resonate more or less with you, or you might identify with. And so it was so helpful to look at that, because we realized there is not one right approach. I mean, not that there ever was, but especially right now, there's a range of terms and there's a range of individuals that connect with those terms. And so the best thing I can do is understand the range, and then, like we're all saying, listen to my community to make sure that I'm honoring the terms that make the most sense for them, right? And also being willing, for each of us to really embrace being learners ourselves, right? Like, we're experts, but we're also constantly learning, so that I can, move that language up and forward.
Nora.
Yeah, I think building off of what you all said, and I think there's a component of that shared language and that shared development of the language, and then also maybe shared interpretation, right? Like, because I feel like so many times in my role, I'm hustling, right? Like, how can I get a bit of this? How can I get a bit of that? Who can I connect to? And so being able to translate almost to the audience in which you're speaking with sometimes is helpful. So I think even the possibility of how are you tapping into literacy? How are you tapping into SEL, with that arts focus at the center, with students at the center, with racial equity at the center? How are you taking that and capitalizing it for you. I mean, because I these roles, you do feel a little bit like you're trying to do what's best for students. And sometimes it takes some creative language to help people see that.
So it is so interesting to me in the business, not the business, the art making that we do is about making meaning. But it would seem that we're also in the business of making meaning within the education sphere as well. So all of what you had to say makes so much sense to me. And this next question, in some ways we've sort of addressed this, but you each work at different levels of arts education, national, local, state. So for you, in your work, how can national, state, and local arts leaders best support one another to create positive outcomes for those who they work on behalf of? In other words, students and art teachers. I hope that question makes sense.
Well, I found I'm just this week, the Maryland Arts Collaborators, which is a group of 2 state agencies, the State Arts Council and the Fine Arts Office of the State Department of Ed, in addition to 2 nonprofits, the 2 advocacy organizations, one for Maryland Arts and one for Maryland Arts Ed. These 4 collaborators have been collaborating for quite some time. Yeah. But we also have our own missions and visions and values. And so the collaboration every once in a while needs a tune-up. And I see that, right? We had a retreat just this week, just to reestablish our vision and what we have in common. What are our shared values? What are the shared components of the purpose of the collaboration? And I think that kind of clarity really helps collaborators to move forward. And I think that every now and again, we need to think about that in a national place, a local place, and a statewide place. So just redefining our, especially post-COVID, our priorities have shifted, and they've shifted quickly, right? Our priority for the last year was really centered on teachers. Like, how can we support teachers? Oh my gosh, teachers are, they need so much. Now we're starting to shift towards how can we create, I love, Mario said something about like the new, what comes next? How can we make sure that we don't revert back to, but we create something new with all this learning? So, when those priorities are shifting, it's great to sit first together, clarify how we can move forward together. And I think that creates less schisms, because we do see those schisms happening, less and more transparency. And also hopefully setting some time aside to do that also invites more joy into the process. More room for innovation, I think, comes as connected to that. So, start with the dreaming first and set aside the time to build the connective tissues that allow collaboration and listening and all of that to run a little more smoothly by building those regular supportive structures. We don't always do that. Sometimes we just get to the work. And I think those tune-ups can be helpful.
So Nora, how does that work for you as a local arts administrator working on the ground with teachers and even students in your district?
Yeah, I think in this, yes, I second everything Alysia just said. But I think what I'm wondering a little bit about is, I really have appreciated those moments when things come out from national and state level, like, this is how you can utilize this. This is how you can utilize this. Chiho at Save the Music Foundation made a connection between me and Milwaukee Public Schools. And so then we're meeting about the secondary music, like how are we using CTE and music to develop courses that can utilize Perkins funding, right? Like, so it's like those kind of connections that actually make opportunities happen for students I find really valuable. And those wouldn't happen without people in these roles that you all are in, helping to make those connections. And so that's kind of what I'm really excited about. And I see that as a direct trickle down to the students, right? Like, because now we're looking at how do we build, sound production courses that are more relevant to students making an income off of their art form, right? Like, and those kind of things wouldn't have happened without people in these roles connecting us on this larger picture.
Your thoughts, Mario?
Look, I think all art educators need to be unapologetic for who and what we are, and to not take any second or third seat we have just as much right, and we're just as essential to be at every educational and leadership conversation that's happening in schools, districts, communities, state, national. It's like the time to sort of be like, oh, I'm going to close the door. My art, I had a basement art room. I loved it. I had a door that went right to the parking lot to my car, and I could close the door, and elementary art was amazing. But guess what? Those days are over. We need to be front and center in every conversation that's happening in schools. When I was in Chicago Public Schools as director of arts, my main goal was to have the arts be part of every conversation, be considered as part of every conversation. And the day that someone reported back to me that a meeting I wasn't in, they brought the arts up, I knew that we were making progress because I didn't have to bring it up myself. So, I always say, if there's not a seat at the table for you, bring your own chair. And that's where I think we really need to move to, because I think the leadership potential for arts educators is greater than anyone recognizes. And the work that I've seen that has moved schools the most is when arts educators embrace that leadership, and then things really start to change, because we have a unique set of skills that nobody else has in that school community. And it brings change, it brings community connection, and it brings joy. Like Alysia said, how about we smile more? And so, it's like, let's tap into that and just sort of like shed some of these old tropes and really just embrace the strength and power that comes in arts education.
This is a great segue into a question for you, Alysia. You addressed advocacy strategies using data in your town hall conversation. Could you revisit your thoughts on quantitative and qualitative data and the value of both for making the case for equitable arts education?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of things that we do in our office, and people are saying, how did you do that? I said, well, I presented the data. The data is what it was, and we kept moving. So when we're thinking about data, data is one of those great tools that you can use with decision makers and with community members to really, I think, hone in on the essentials of the story that you're trying to tell. So for instance, the Maryland State Department of Education just released a new resource, and I think we'll be able to share it somewhere, wherever this is posted. It's called Transforming the Culture of Maryland Schools for Black Boys. And so that task force met for a year to create a set of recommendations that will be utilized by Maryland schools in elevating the student achievement of Black boys. That's really transformative. And inside of that, though, is a data story, because without looking at disaggregating our data, our student achievement data, we wouldn't even know that group was falling behind so dramatically, right? We were seeing big differences between Black girl achievement and Black boy achievement. So just being able to look at that data and just crisp, and then make some determinations about what's needed in collaboration, of course, with the folks that are impacted. But then sometimes we don't have such crisp data. And so we've got to get stories, right? And by compiling story, and we as arts educators, we are great at storytelling, right? Most of us consider ourselves storytellers in some type of medium, right? So this idea of just gathering stories from students, it's been very impactful, and also in moving a lot of my work forward. So, I mentioned that I visit hundreds of schools annually. That's really important to me. And in every step, I don't just come, I hate coming and seeing performances. I won't show up for a performance. I want to come to the rehearsals, to the class. And then I want to talk to students and families and teachers and ask them the whys and what they need, and the whys of why they're doing what they need. Collecting those stories helps me to compile them and spot trends. And then I'm able to share them. And those stories really motivate folks, especially when change is needed. We need motivation in order to move. And the numbers simply won't do it. But we've got to hear about a teacher who became tearful when asked, what do you need? Just remembering that she's instructing a lot of special education courses and doesn't have the support she needs on how to do that. And so she feels each time as though she's doing these students a disservice. Right. And just a simple ask of what do you need? Right. And so those are the stories that then allow me to gather resources and gather a lot of momentum so we can make sure that teachers have what they need. So I think, human beings love stories. That's why Netflix makes so much money. And so just remembering that when we can capture those stories and that data together, then we're able to create strong resources that really can create systemic shifts, but seismic shifts as well. Like we can just, this task force on Black Boy Achievement was the first of its kind in Maryland and has created some major recommendations that we hope will see a big shift in the achievement. And also the achievement really is about schools preparing themselves and making themselves better capable, right, of educating everyone. So that will create change, right? That makes access and excellence more accessible for everyone. So I think those two pieces together, that idea of quantitative and qualitative, everyone's very much aware of it, but I'd love for people to just even think about dropping that all the way down, even to assessment. How can you tell the story of what's happening, the learning that's happening in your classroom? The grades tell one story, but there's a richer piece there. So when we think about advocacy, we can think about that through line all the way up and down. And I think that's been really helpful in helping to kind of bring people along and help them understand the power of arts ed and the power of making sure that we have what we need so we can be successful.
That wraps up part 1 of this podcast. See you the next time with part 2 of talking about the intersection of national, state, and local arts education leadership.